Harvard Divinity School.
100 Years Rudolf Steiner, December 15th and 16th, 2025.
Everybody, good morning to you, and hello to everyone who's joining online. And I am thrilled to be able to present my paper to you today. And the title of this paper is The Faculties of the Mind in Waldorf Education, the Epistemological Foundations of the Theory for the Enlightenment of the Practice. So I would like to talk to you about a topic that is dear to me, because it is the subject of my doctoral dissertation. And I finished the dissertation this year, which I defended at the University of Upper Alsace in Mulhouse, which is in France. And you can see the name of the slide. And my talk today will summarize some of the findings, which I believe could be of interest to researchers, specifically in Waldorf education, but also to those who are interested in Steiner's philosophy in general. My work is situated in the field of philosophy of education. And that means that I try to shed some light on the philosophical concepts within the educational ideas. And since our author, Rudolf Steiner, he's not only the creator of Waldorf movement, but of much more, as we know. It is his understanding of the human being overall, which is at the center of everything and that he created and which interests me. So my topic today is the epistemological grounds of his philosophy of education. And more specifically, it is his theory of human faculties of the mind that I deal with in my dissertation in more detail and that I will talk to you about today. So first of all, let me start by saying some introductory words about Waldorf education that is related to my topic. So it should be said that this educational movement, in my mind, distinguishes itself from other progressive education movements that were created at the same time, at the beginning of the 20th century, all over Europe and in the US. And this difference is actually at the center of this pedagogy. It is the spiritual view of the human being. And Steiner, of course, was not the only one, not the only educator in this progressive movement who saw the human being as a spiritual one. But its unique position comes rather from the fact that this education survived, and it survived when other numerous attempts at creating schools have, as we usually say in research, failed. As we all know, Waldorf education was founded and is based on Rudolf Steiner's philosophy. Since he founded this educational movement at the end of his life. And at this point, his philosophy has turned into a full-fledged spiritual philosophy. It has several pillars or concepts on which the philosophy of education is based. And one of them is the anthropological idea that the human being has several essential capacities or faculties. He explicitly cites three of them, and we have already talked about them just in the previous presentation. These faculties are faculties in English or Fähigkeiten in German, and I'm talking about thinking, feeling, and willing. Of course, in Steiner's case, I think it would be more appropriate not to call them faculties of the mind, but faculties of the spirit, but we will stick to the more commonly accepted term. So this theory, as we know it, has spiritual underpinnings. The three faculties are described mostly as forces within a child, since we're talking about education. His theory of 7-year development is also connected to this idea that each faculty of the mind has its own time to develop, and the description of the processes happening in the spiritual and the physical parts of our nature have clearly an esoteric and a spiritual foundation. It is also worth mentioning that we have to base our conceptual analysis of his educational works, namely the pedagogical conferences, that we can find regrouped in the pedagogical section of the complete edition of his works. And we can notice here something interesting. So first of all, the multiple descriptions of faculties' work within a human being and within a child are, first of all, completely dispersed throughout the text. Second of all, some practical didactical teaching methods are proposed in connection with the development of the faculties. So there is a link. But it is not clear, not exactly clear, how these connections work, and it is not proposed in a structured or in a systematic way that we are able to clearly have a perception of how practice is connected to the theory. And it is yet to be developed then. It is understandable, though, why this could have happened. Prior to the establishment of the first Waldorf school, Steiner had already developed his ideas of the functioning of the human spirit. And he then later tried to connect this conception of the human being and of the child, the development of the child, to the bits and pieces of practices that are just about to take place in the new school. And that in itself should warn us against quick summarizations of the educational practices that can be expressed in short sentences or in mottos. And it suggests that we need to take a closer look into the foundations of the concepts and try to re-establish the link between the theory and the practice. So these pedagogical lectures that I'm talking about are the basis for our understanding of Steiner's anthropology today. And the division, as we know, into three faculties is a crucial point for all schools all throughout the world. And this motto that we as teachers need to develop, thinking, feeling, and willing, is something that everybody knows. And it needs to be said in regards to the position of the Waldorf education, especially today, that it sets it apart as an educational practice, even within alternative pedagogies. And let me explain why. The theory of faculties is a conception of the human mind that used to be popular up until the beginning of the 20th century. So the terms that Steiner uses, which is reason, feeling, and the will, they are not new, and they were not new in philosophy and in the field of the nascent field of psychology of that time. So even the psychology of the time accepted these terms as the structure of the human spirit, human mind. But it's since changed, and these terms are not in use anymore. So like I said, it puts Waldorf in a unique position. And when I say unique, I mean solitary. And it is important to highlight that because Waldorf exists today, it's something that survived, and it's not just a compilation of practices that can happen with some pedagogical theories throughout the years. No, Waldorf insists that it is a practice based on the teaching. It's based on a philosophy. It's based on a theory that wants to keep evolving and wants to keep adapting to the new conditions of our lives. And in that sense, it is possible to look into the conception of the human spirits, of its roots and of its origin, and especially to follow through the evolution of these concepts to be able to understand what the practice has become. So we need to be able to establish this epistemological grounds of the practice. By doing that, actually, we'll be able to connect what this philosophy has to offer to put it into relation with other philosophical or even psychological approaches of today. So, of course, we have gathered here today to talk about his spiritual philosophy. But before developing this type of philosophy, it is important to remember that he first had his earlier philosophical period, and that the roots of the theory of faculties can actually be found there. So when we analyze this division into three faculties of the human being that is present in his earlier works, we immediately notice that it is specifically the concept of thinking that is at the forefront of these works. Thus, for example, in the philosophy of freedom, he explains that knowledge comes from two sources, perception and concept. And so we are able to form representations or an individualized concept of something that we have had experience with. He then explains that what he means by perception and what he means by human thinking that can grasp and form concepts in relation to perception. What is interesting that he also classifies the concept of experience that we have of the world, that everybody has of the world, under the concept of perception. And what I would like to draw attention to is the fact that experience here which later will come to play a crucial role in his philosophy of education, it's explained here through the concept of thinking and conceptual education. So on the one hand, we can see the perception that plays an important role in establishing knowledge of something, and it pinpoints the importance of the connection to the world. So this is something that has always been important for Waldorf education, that it's not the abstraction of ideas, that it's possible to stay connected to the world. And yet, this is not how the connectedness to the world is described in a later period. No, not exactly like that. And the knowledge is described in a slightly different way. In fact, these earlier ideas that he describes in his philosophical period stem from his studies of German classical thought, like Kant, Fichte, and Hegel, and he develops these ideas, he continues to develop the ideas in that vein. So this is why the concept of feeling, for example, and willing, the will, they are in this period in close relation to the thinking and to the conceptual understanding. And they do not play such an important role in the texts. They are there, but they're not as important in this as the thinking. But the appearance, what shows us the difference is the appearance of these terms in the additions that he later introduces into philosophy of freedom. And the appearance of these terms shows this clearly, that it is a retrospective interpretation. It has been done slightly differently later. So now that we come to the analysis of the pedagogical conferences, we straight away come to the, we see the differences in the changes of the vocabulary and in the way that this concept of thinking is treated. It is quite obvious that throughout the years of his philosophy has seen an evolution, and some concepts have been transformed, which is quite natural for a thinker, for a philosopher. And this evolution concerns the concept of thinking and faculties. So what happened? We notice something peculiar. To speak about thinking, this first faculty, Steiner often talks about intellectual understanding now. So the word intellect was introduced, and we also easily notice that it has a bit of a negative connotation to it. So this faculty, the thinking, which was particularly put forward in the first period in his earlier philosophy, now receives an astonishing number of comments about the dangers of unilateral use of intellect, for instance. So something that was viewed as the faculty that connects us to the world is now described sometimes as something that runs the risk of detachment from reality. So our thinking is described as logical. It's something that lets us structure our perceptions and our concepts. It systematizes our knowledge, and it can also do so by working with concepts that have no basis in reality. And this, of course, according to Steiner's epistemology, is not advised. The abstractedness of intellect is heavily criticized, and he tries to find ways to bring us back to this warmth and consistency of reality that he seeks. Because the problem that Steiner emphasizes in his pedagogical ideas is the unilateral use of the faculty, of the thinking faculty. He brings forward here a common critique that other progressive educators have put forward, which is that in education, it is about the totality of the human being, of the child, that needs to be brought up, that needs to be educated. So they all wanted a child to be brought up as a harmonious human being, just like Schiller wanted. So this position among other educators of the time is not unique, is not new to Steiner, to educational theories. But what is more unique, that I would argue here, is that it is the conceptualization of epistemology behind the pedagogical ideas that he proposes. And that, of course, comes forward from his own philosophy and from his own theory of knowledge. So we ask ourselves, if the intellect is not enough, And other types of teaching methods, classes should be used, should be brought forward in education. So what other faculties need to be trained, and specifically, why do we need to train them? And of course, his study of theosophy and of spiritual works here, but the changes in this uh, later epistemological understanding of reality, it plays an evident role here. We notice that we have here the concept of several bodies, such as the physical body, the etheric body, the astral body, and the ego. They are now put forward, and they are described on the same grounds as the theory of faculties. In this theory of three faculties, it is also enriched, so slightly changed, by its connection to the body. So we know that thinking is connected to the nervous system, the feeling faculty comes into play in the rhythmic system, and the world, the will is connected to the third part, which is the metabolic and system and the limbs. And it should be pointed out that all of these aspects are new to his philosophy as opposed to the earlier works, and they were not present in his early anthropological understanding of the human being. And with these changes, we can also shed light on the changes in these epistemological concepts. So the same questions can be asked here as for the first period. That is, how do we understand the world? How do we perceive? How does a child perceive the world? And so the concept of experience, which I talked about before, takes on a new meaning here. So now it is about a living experience of a human being. The experiences that usually are considered as subjective scientifically now come forth and they come to the center of the epistemological questions. This I would like to highlight. So let me say that in other words. Steiner's later epistemology, so the one that we find in the pedagogical lectures, puts forward, much more than it does so in his earlier philosophical works, the role of a personal and incarnate experience as the basis for knowledge. And with this, we can see a clear shift in the epistemological position to knowledge. The shift from the idea that we grasp the reality, the truth of the reality by our thinking, which is universal, to the idea that some other faculties play a role in our knowledge of reality. It means, more specifically, that in order to bring us to a full experience of phenomena in the world, so in order even to experience the thinking, something else is needed. So in his understanding, all the three faculties play a role in our knowledge of the world, and the willing and the will and the feeling are not here only to play a subjective role as a subjective part of the experience. What does that mean? This is about the concept of reality, what he calls reality. And of course, when we look at this concept of reality, it is deeply spiritual for Steiner. So what he calls real is not only a perceptible phenomena of objects in the external world, but also things such as moods and feelings and atmospheres. And that is because spiritual activity and inner forces are a natural part of the living creature, even though not visible directly by senses or by perception, but nonetheless present. And thus, of course, they can be grasped by faculties. The forces in our things are real, they are present in the sensible, it can be perceived. And in order to be perceived, they all, the totality of the human being should be working together. So one of the examples of this description, a brief one, we can find in his first pedagogical course for the first school, which is Study of Men, when he describes the experience of the forest, where first we go out in the forest and we live this experience. He talks about the experience of the will and the perceptions. And then when we study the laws that are in work, in nature, and that would be studying or experiencing this nature by thinking, and this shows the difference of what he wants to describe as experiencing something by faculties. I think I would like to stop here, unless I have another 2 or 3 minutes. I'm not sure. It's very hard when you don't see anybody.
All right.
It,
Yeah, we're about at time, but Matthew, can you help me redistribute the screen? Sorry. Thank you,
Okay.
Natalia.
How many? All right. Another example would be his example of feeling of reality, for instance, for children. He says that in the example of his later works of 306, he says that concrete examples and experiences are important to be shown for children, but it also needs to be done in the right way. So, for instance, if you bring a dead leaf to a classroom.
Natalia, I'm sorry
Yes.
to interrupt. Time is up. Would you please conclude your presentation?
Sure. Okay. What I wanted to show you today is that with this analysis of the epistemological grounds, it is possible to, on the one hand, bring connections to the theories of today, and on the other hand, to show how Waldorf education and Steiner's philosophy, of course, is different and is unique. Thank you very much for your attention.
Sponsored by the Program for the Evolution of Spirituality.
Copyright 2023, the Preston Fellows of Harvard College.